For the last 8 years, millions of people have been misled by this video. It's a video by the Wall Street Journal about this guy named Max who is trying to beat the world's best chess player with only 1 month of practice. Yes, that really is the premise of this video, and I'm sure many of you already know about this as it's become super famous because of just how ridiculous this premise is, and Max got a ton of hate for this video. There are thousands of negative comments, plenty of online discussion, and several reaction videos all making fun of Max for this, but I'm here to tell you that this is actually all super unfair, and Max did not deserve the hate that he got. The only reason people reacted the way they did is because the Wall Street Journal video is extremely misleading, leaves out context, and is even just straight up incorrect in some places. I'm going to show you some shocking evidence that will completely change your mind about this whole story, as well as some truly insane behavior from the Wall Street Journal, and I think by the end, you're going to see why this is such a crazy story and why it's actually the Wall Street Journal who deserves most of the blame for what went wrong here. In this video, we're going to start with a recap of the Wall Street Journal video, why people hated it so much, and then I'll show you the true story, what really happened, and why this is all so unfair, and then finally we'll talk about the aftermath. Let's start with that recap of the Wall Street Journal video. In the first part of the video, Max introduces himself as an extreme learner.
Alright, so who am I? I'm Max Deutsch, I'm 24 years old, I live in San Francisco, and I would consider myself an extreme learner.
We're told he has this series called Month to Master, where he masters a new skill each month. It shows us a few examples of these challenges, here's the full list, and you can see that the first 11 challenges in Month to Master are pretty reasonable, but then Max tells us about this final challenge.
The final challenge is to defeat world champion Magnus Carlsen at a game of chess.
So we're hardly a minute into the video and we already have a pretty terrible impression of Max. How could he have thought this was a good idea, and why is this final challenge so much harder than all his other ones? In the second part of the video, we move on to the 30 days of prep time that Max has for this challenge.
I first sat down to try to figure out how I could possibly play a competitive game against Magnus with only a month of training. And I very quickly realized that I just couldn't climb that chess skill ladder fast enough in a month. And so if I wasn't going to learn chess like a human, the other option I had was to learn chess like a computer.
Max tells us this vague plan to learn chess like a computer. He talks about creating this algorithm, and it says his plan was to memorize all the moves that his algorithm suggested. It's not very clear what this means, but it does not sound like something that's realistic. But it doesn't end up mattering because in the final part of the video, Max then tells us that he didn't even complete this algorithm.
One thing that I did not anticipate was how long it would take my computer to come up with this algorithm. And so as we're speaking right now, my computer is still chugging away. So right now, as I'm sitting here, I have nothing memorized. I think the game starts in the next 3 hours, so cutting it really close.
So the challenge was already ridiculous, but now he hasn't studied, hasn't completed this algorithm, and so it's literally just a regular guy with no training against the best in the world. They have their game, Max loses, and that's basically the end of the video. Delusional challenge, weird algorithm plan that involves memorizing all the moves, he doesn't finish it, and then loses. Okay, so now that we've finished with the recap of the video, why did people hate it so much? Well, I think it's pretty obvious, right? The initial challenge is just so overconfident and delusional, his whole plan with the algorithm makes no sense, and then because he didn't even finish the algorithm, he shows up with nothing prepared. It all feels like such a waste of time. There are other things too. If you read the comments and watch the reaction videos, there are other smaller things that people point out. For example, they didn't have a proper chess clock for the game, and it really does seem like they had to use an app on Magnus's phone as the chess clock, which is pretty funny. It just shows a lack of preparedness, or this scene where he's doing a Rubik's Cube as Magnus arrives. You know, all these little things just makes it all so much worse, but really the main thing here is the sheer ridiculousness of someone actually attempting this challenge and thinking they could beat the world's best chess player in only a month of practice. But hold on a second. This doesn't actually make sense, right? Like, okay, if you're going to tell me there's this crazy, delusional guy who thinks he can beat the best chess player in the world with just a month of practice, fine. I mean, it's surprising, but I guess I can believe that. There's lots of crazy people in the world. But Max actually played against Magnus Carlsen. This is a real game that happened, and so who set up this match against Magnus Carlsen? It's not like Max could have done this on his own. A match like this requires resources and connections, so it must have been the Wall Street Journal who arranged it, right? And I think that's the assumption here. That's not a big revelation, but if it's the Wall Street Journal who made this game happen, then did the Wall Street Journal also think this was a good idea? Because if they're providing funding and manpower, which would probably require multiple internal approvals for this project to go forward, did no one at the Wall Street Journal question this and realize how absurd of an idea it was? They had to have known, right? I mean, they're media experts. That's literally their job. They must have known how this would turn out, right? And did anyone from the Wall Street Journal say anything to Max? And if they didn't, why not? Did they want this to be such an embarrassing disaster? Or did they genuinely believe in this project? Or was it something else entirely? It's these questions that made me first realize there must be more to what's going on here, and I'm happy to tell you that now we have all the evidence, so let's finally get into the true story. Okay, the true story. There's a lot to cover here, but let's just start with the fact that this whole thing wasn't even Max's idea. It was actually offered to him by the Wall Street Journal. His original challenge in Month to Master was to actually beat the app version of Magnus Carlsen. There's an app called the Play Magnus app, which simulates Magnus Carlsen at different ages, and this is what Max was originally trying to beat. This app really is just as difficult as the real Magnus Carlsen. It's designed to be that way, so it was still an impossible challenge for Max to take on in just a month, but like, who cares, right? Nobody would have cared if Max was overconfident against an app. It's only when the Wall Street Journal made this offer to Max that he could play the real Magnus Carlsen instead that now the stakes are so much higher and the challenge became so controversial. Max is definitely still responsible here. He understood this offer and chose to accept it, but there are a few details that make his decision a little more understandable. Before Max met the Wall Street Journal, his series, Month to Master, was unfortunately not doing well at all. Month to Master was basically just a personal project of Max's. He would do these challenges that we saw, and he'd write one article every single day on the website Medium about these challenges. These articles clearly took a lot of effort, but not many people were reading them. As you can see here, most of them only got a couple of likes. I read all 382 of these articles, and to be honest, I can see why they weren't popular. They're pretty boring. Nobody was interacting with them. On day 60, Max's whole article is polling the audience about a critical question, but nobody responds, and this is pretty common. It's kind of sad. And even after hundreds of articles, the series was getting even less attention than before, and given how much time these would have taken, that must have been pretty frustrating and demoralizing. So Max is writing these articles, nobody's reading them, but then one day, as if by fate, Max has a chance encounter with a Wall Street Journal reporter named Ben Cohen. This encounter was for something totally unrelated. It's not really worth going into, but after, Max messaged Ben and asked him to take a look at his series, and that is how the Wall Street Journal found out about this series. And shortly after, Ben made the offer to Max to swap out the original final challenge with a game against the real Magnus Carlsen. Once again, it is Max's responsibility for accepting this challenge, but this must have seemed to him like the opportunity of a lifetime. He would be featured in the Wall Street Journal, he'd get a showcase game against the real Magnus Carlsen, and all this would bring lots of attention to Month to Master, and all that effort he'd put in would be finally worth it. This was Max's big break. It probably felt like destiny, and especially given how poorly his series had been performing, how could he turn this down? I hope at this point you're starting to see a different story emerge, but we're just getting started. Let's get into some of the really crazy stuff in this story and talk about Ben Cohen, who's the Wall Street Journal reporter who made this initial offer. Now, I don't know about you, but at this point, I was really suspicious about Ben. I thought maybe he did this on purpose to humiliate Max and get a viral story out of it, but the more I looked into it, the more I realized that no, he definitely meant well here. In fact, as you'll soon see, Ben is the biggest fan of this challenge. He fully believes in Max here to the point of total insanity, and this is pretty clear when we take a look at the article Ben wrote. As we read what Ben wrote about this, remember, in this real game that actually happened, Max has no algorithm, no chess training, and is playing against the best chess player in the world. These are just the facts of what's going on in this game. It really is the lamest game ever, but here's how Ben describes these events. Max moved his pawn to e4. Magnus moved his pawn to e5. Max had been right about the opening. After 8 moves, using his own limited chess ability, the unthinkable was occurring. Max was winning. Magnus was aware of Max's algorithm, but Magnus didn't know he was bluffing. Magnus's hands were shaking, not unlike his first world championship where he was so nervous he dropped his pencil. This is not going to be easy, thought Magnus. I mean, it really is astounding. It's astounding that anybody could write this. So much of the criticism Max got was for being overconfident, for not understanding how absurd this whole challenge was, but clearly Ben is the one who most directly exhibits these behaviors, right? And if you want one more example of this, by the way, on Ben's website, he has links to all his favorite articles that he wrote, and the link he has for this one is called Magnus Carlsen's Most Epic Chess Match. Do you see what I mean here? Is it fair for us to blame Max for the absurdity of this challenge when it wasn't even his idea, he wasn't really in a position to turn it down, and the guy whose idea it actually was writing these things about, Magnus's hands shaking with nervousness and stuff like that? Once again, I do think Ben had good intentions here, and he was trying to help Max, but he just wasn't thinking about this in the right way, and I suspect that this contributed to the perceived ridiculousness of the video. Okay, we've talked about the backstory, Month to Master, Ben Cohen and the Wall Street Journal, but we still need to talk about one of the most important parts in this whole story, and that is the algorithm. Let's take a look at the section of the video concerning the algorithm.
And so if I wasn't going to learn chess like a human, the other option I had was to learn chess like a computer. The idea is that could I build an algorithm in my computer that looks at any given chess position, and without having to go any further, any deeper, could say whether that's a favorable position or not. I would ultimately turn my brain into a very slow and slightly less sophisticated chess computer.
There really isn't much specific information here, but it seems to imply that Max's plan is to give the algorithm a given chessboard position. The algorithm will tell him what the best move is for that situation. He'll memorize the move, and he'll memorize so many of these that when it comes time to play Magnus, he'll always know what to do because he's memorized all the moves. But is this actually Max's plan? Well, it's certainly what people thought his plan was, myself included, because that's really what it seems like from the video. It's pretty clear from the comments that this is what people thought because there's many comments about this specifically, like, this guy literally thought he could memorize billions of chess positions. This is like trying to do the math by memorizing the answer to every problem ever. It gives the impression that Max doesn't understand just how many possible games of chess there are, which, would be very foolish for someone doing a challenge like this. There's also kind of a secondary criticism of this plan where, if the plan really was to memorize as many moves as possible, then what's the point of making your own algorithm? You could just download Stockfish and start memorizing moves right away. And comments also pointed this out. Bro is trying to reinvent Stockfish. Max not only needs to learn what Stockfish is, but also look up the Dunning-Kruger effect because he's the walking embodiment of it. I really want to hammer home the point that this really is what people thought the plan was from watching the video, and it's not just the comments, but the reaction videos as well.
That doesn't make any sense too. First of all, we had Stockfish in 2017, better than any human at around 3,000 ELO. You didn't need to invent anything. His plan was to memorize all of the favorable and unfavorable moves that his algorithm suggested. So basically, memorizing random positions, which is very funny considering millions of chess games are played daily.
So at this point in the video, there's like a little slide that says Max constructed an algorithm using data from thousands of documented chess matches. And this is the only thing about this entire video that Personally, I felt mildly offended by. You don't need to really build an algorithm, but to be honest, it probably worked because the video's got like 10 million views almost.
If his plan was to memorize all the favorable and unfavorable moves that his algorithm suggested, I mean, first off, that's just memorizing all of the moves. And second, that sort of defeats the whole purpose of his approach. If he's just planning on memorizing moves, just go load up Stockfish and start memorizing.
So, as you can see, not only is the plan criticized for the reasons we just discussed, but some people don't even think the algorithm existed at all, and it was just an excuse that Max made up.
At the end of the day, I don't think he had any kind of algorithm or was really training anything. I think he found this as like a scapegoat when he realized he wasn't going to be able to revolutionize chess engines and the game of chess in 1 month.
This is incorrect. Max really did make an algorithm, and here he is demonstrating it, but I don't blame any of these reaction videos at all. Their only mistake was trusting the Wall Street Journal. All these criticisms would make perfect sense if what we see in the Wall Street Journal video was an accurate portrayal of the algorithm, but it just isn't. Okay, but if this isn't Max's plan, what is Max's actual plan with the algorithm? In the Month to Master series, we can see that the true plan was actually to create a unique chess algorithm, a really, really small chess algorithm. You probably know that massive chess algorithms like Stockfish use billions of parameters, and there are also smaller chess algorithms that use only millions of parameters. And Max was wondering, could you take this to the extreme and build an even smaller algorithm using only thousands of parameters, and specifically limiting it to only 40,000 digits total in the whole program? In the Month to Master articles, Max references a world record where a man memorized 70,000 digits of pi, so Max argues that this is around the limit of the human brain, and so maybe, if he made an algorithm that used only 40,000 digits, then one day a super genius could come along and memorize it and essentially run the algorithm in their brain. This is Max's actual plan, and yes, it's still extremely far-fetched, but far less so than memorizing, trillions of individual chess moves, and I think as a concept, it's actually really creative and interesting. I mentioned before that his Month to Master articles are pretty boring to read, but actually I found this section of the final challenge really interesting, and it's just so different from what we see in the Wall Street Journal video. So yeah, this title card about memorizing all the moves, that's just straight up wrong. His plan was not to memorize all the moves, and what is frankly just so hilarious and unfair about the Wall Street Journal including this text in the video is that one of Max's articles is literally entirely dedicated to saying that this is not his plan. I'm serious, Month to Master number 339 is a whole article entirely about how ludicrously impossible memorizing all the moves is, and Max includes some calculations. He says that if he could memorize one move per second, it would take a trillion years, as he puts it. So just think of is that not so unfair? Max is writing these articles about the final challenge. The Wall Street Journal are going to do a video about these articles, about the final challenge. And in the articles, Max clearly says what his plan is and explicitly says that it is not his plan to memorize all the moves, but then the video comes out and it literally says his plan was to memorize all the moves, the exact opposite of what he was saying. It really seems like the Wall Street Journal video team didn't read these articles, and it's a shame because I think it's actually a really creative idea, and if we were simply shown this plan for what it was, I believe Max would have received far less hate, and it's just, once again, really unfair. Max was just a regular guy, trying new things to build a reputation for himself on the internet. He put a ton of work into his series, but it wasn't getting much attention, but then he gets the opportunity of a lifetime from someone who had good intentions, but also some crazy overconfidence. Despite this, Max comes up with a cool idea that was genuinely interesting to read about, and Max had every reason to think he'd be represented fairly here. All the information was right there in his series, so the Wall Street Journal could read it and know what was going on. Ben Cohen was probably very supportive. I mean, he's obviously a massive fan, and we can also see that even on the day of the game, there was some signage about the Play Magnus app, which you might remember was Max's original challenge, so it seems that it was still being talked about at this point, it was still part of the narrative, and Max probably thought that would be represented in the final product. Unfortunately, instead, the Wall Street Journal releases a highly misleading mockery of the whole thing, and immediately Max gets a tidal wave of hate. Thousands of negative comments, reaction videos, every chess forum is making fun of him. People are coming to his Month to Master articles just to leave hate comments. Max had put so much into trying to grow his online reputation, but it was an absolute disaster. He tries to defend himself, posting a new article talking about how the game was something that was offered to him, and also insisting that he never thought he could actually beat Magnus, but it's futile. Nobody cares, and he just gets more hate. Presumably, many people were trying to reach out to Max for comment around this time, but there's no evidence of him responding to any of them. He deletes his social media history, many of the videos in the Month to Master articles are also deleted, and then the guy who used to write an article about these goofy challenges every single day for hundreds of days, even when nobody was reading them, stops completely. And we don't hear from Max for quite a while. So there you have it, the true story. We've mostly focused on the things the Wall Street Journal did because that's the side of the story that nobody really knows, but it does need to be said that Max did make some mistakes here, so before we move on to the aftermath, let's cover that side and answer these two questions. Was Max overconfident about this challenge? At the start of the series, no. Max clearly says he believes he'll fail the challenge, and these quotes like, "It's better to fail, it's about striving for mastery," all the standard stuff you'd expect to hear, an impossible challenge that is meant to be impossible for the purposes of learning. Sometimes there is language implying there could be a chance, like near impossible or dancing on the boundary between what's possible and what's not, but that's about it. When we get to the final challenge, there is some overconfidence, but more in the algorithm. In this section, Max says he doesn't expect to beat Magnus, but he really believes in his algorithm approach, even though it's extremely unrealistic. In one article, there's a section called Widespread Adoption, where he says, "I'd like to think that, if this works, it'll cause a bit of a stir in the chess community." He even names this strategy Max Chess and the calculations Max Calculations. It's a bit ridiculous, but overall, still not too bad. And then we get to Month to Master number 381, which is the one place I think we can say Max really showed overconfidence. This is after the challenge is over, and Max writes, "I'd estimate it would take between 500 to 1,000 hours to become a human chess computer capable of defeating the world champion." So yeah, it really seems like he's saying he could have won if he just had more time. This statement did not go over well. One guy comments, "What a load of bullshit. Take your 500 hours and shove it up your ass." And he gets 184 likes on this, which is way more than most of Max's entire articles got. Now, maybe there is an argument to give Max a pass on this. It really is the only place in the whole series that something like this is written, and I do think this might have just been a defensive reaction because this was posted on the same day that the Wall Street Journal video was released and all the hate started coming in. But regardless, even if it was a defensive reaction or he meant something slightly different, this is definitely pretty bad. What other mistakes did Max make? There's a lot of little things we could talk about, but I think clearly the main one is not finishing the algorithm, and in general just not spending enough time on this project. Max only spent 34 hours total on the whole final challenge, which seems low for how big of an opportunity this was. And sometimes it's painful to read this part, for example, where Max, he's preparing for the game against Magnus, but here he says he's visiting family and spending only a few minutes each day on the project. Like, really? Could you really not have visited family a few weeks later? He definitely could have put more hours into this, and the result would have been so much better. There are a lot of other smaller things we could discuss, and in general, this whole story has so many extra details that I wasn't able to fit into the video, so let me know if there's anything in particular you want more information on, but let's now finally get into the aftermath. How did all of this turn out 8 years later? When we last left Max, he was getting a ton of hate, basically chased off the internet, deleting his social media and many of the Month to Master videos, and we don't hear from Max for quite a while. But then, a year later, there's this video, which appears to be an interview with him, and look, it's from a channel called Max's Monthly Challenge. I was really surprised to see this because I didn't realize Max had another YouTube channel and he's posting an interview he did on it. Until I realized that no, this guy is Max's Monthly Challenge. Yes, that's right. This is another guy who also has a monthly challenge-based series and who is also named Max.
Hey, my name is Max, and I've started a new project called Max's Monthly Challenge, where every month I set a new challenge and I attack it with full steam, and you can see how I go along the way.
So we have Max's monthly challenge interviewing Max's month to master. It's very confusing. Basically, this Max was inspired by month to master, and he's really positive towards Max. He even starts the interview by calling Max one of his heroes.
Guys, so I got to interview one of my heroes, a guy called Max Deutsch, who's done some incredible things, and he's a really big inspiration for me and the reason I started this channel.
Unfortunately, people had not forgotten the Wall Street Journal incident, and the video was not well received. Tons of dislikes, more negative comments like fraud, and this guy's awful. It really just shows how bad Max's reputation had become that even a year later, and with an extremely positive interviewer, he's still getting all this hate. What you're looking at is only part 1 of the interview, and in this whole part 1, they don't bring up the chess challenge at all. It's a friendly interview, but there's still this sense of, tension. This is Max's first appearance since the whole incident, and we obviously all just want to hear about the final challenge, but they avoid the topic until part 2 of the interview.
So this is part 2 of my interview with Max Deutsch. If you haven't already, please check out part 1, and so it all makes sense. But this is one of my favorite pieces of content. I love this guy, so I hope you enjoy it.
Even in this part, they mostly discuss the other challenges, but finally, at the end of the video, they finally bring up the topic we've all been waiting to hear.
And then finally, definitely the most ambitious challenge of the 12.
Yeah, so the most ambitious challenge, and one that I hadn't planned on, but came knocking and happened, was to defeat world champion Magnus Carlsen at a game of chess.
Yeah.
One of the writers from the Wall Street Journal, he had been covering Magnus Carlsen and knew his team really well. And so he proposed the idea of, would I be able to connect you with Magnus for a game contingent on the Wall Street Journal covering it? And I was like, contingency or not, this sounds impossible. But if Tiger Woods came up to me and said, hey, you want to play a round of golf? I would say, I don't play golf, but yes. So that's sort of how it happened. I mean, ultimately, I figured it was going to be effectively a 0% chance that I'd win the game. But I figured that the challenge would inspire one of the most interesting and unusual learning challenge out of, all the other ones. So, and I think it delivered on that promise.
They also talk about the Backlash specifically, and Max really tries to downplay how much hate he got.
Kind of a beautiful way to end a really cool project. But I know a lot of people that were really into chess got offended by the idea that someone could beat Magnus Carlsen. How did you find that response and the media reaction? When
I agreed to play the game, I knew they were going to cover it in the journal. I didn't know it was going to be the front page story. I had no clue that the article and the videos were going to be viewed tens of millions of times. It got way more eyeballs than I ever expected. With eyeballs came a little bit of judgment or negativity. Most of the sort of negativity that I received from the chess community was from people that just didn't have all the information about the project and what I was thinking and the background on how it happened and all of that. And so I can't even blame these people. From what they saw, they were exactly right in their observation, which is some random kid says, I can defeat world champion Magnus Carlsen at a game of chess in a month. If that's the story that you read, yeah, obviously I wouldn't like that guy either, So I totally get it. And the truth is 80% of the response was positive, but I can tell you that despite everything I just said, the 20% feels like a million times more than any of the positive comments.
Of course.
So yeah, there's no way you can say that 80% of the response was positive. I don't blame him for trying to keep a good attitude, but people still made fun of this, calling him delusional. This video also got a lot of dislikes and a lot of negative comments, just like part 1. In this interview, we definitely get the impression that Max is still unhappy about how he was portrayed, and I don't blame him. There are so many things that could have gone differently, and once again, the dislikes show us that Max really can't post on the internet anymore. His reputation is so bad that whatever he does, whatever he's involved with, is just gonna get hate, and this truly is the last time we directly hear from him. Years go by, and Max never posts about this again, but things actually turned out pretty well for him. He co-founded a company called Studio, which is a sort of educational course website, and it seems to be pretty successful. There are lots of big names that have courses there: Mark Rober, Charlie Puth. They have lots of employees and appear to be expanding. You gotta give Max some credit here. I think a lot of people would have let this kind of backlash ruin their whole life, but Max was able to move on, and it all worked out pretty well. And that brings us to the end. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you think about this whole thing. And if you like this video, definitely check out my other channel, Jeremiah855, and the most recent video there called RoboSpear. It's a video about the game Old School RuneScape, where myself and Muffin used computer optimization to solve a strategy for killing the boss Yama. Even if you don't play Old School RuneScape, you might still like RoboSpear if you're into highly technical video game strategies and speedrunning, you know, that kind of stuff. And it was actually a really successful method. We used it to break the world record, and we still have that world record to this day. It's still the highest damaging method to kill the boss, but it was actually nerfed a bit. It was maybe a bit too powerful. So Jagex, the company that makes RuneScape, they released this blog post discussing the method and why they had to nerf it a bit. You know, it's kind of sad, but I do understand why they did it. It was a good decision. But anyway, if that's something that interests you, definitely check that out. And once again, thanks for watching.